Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Green Left Show. My name is Isaac Nellist, and today we're going to be talking about the massive protests that have been taking place in Los Angeles in the US, opposing these massive campaign of deportations by the Trump administration and the ICE agency who's been carrying them out. And to talk about this, we're going to be joined by Thomas Malone, who's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America Bread and Roses Caucus. So that's going to be really interesting. Just before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that I am talking from the stolen land of the Gadigal people. This land was never ceded and always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And also, before we get started, if you enjoy this show today and you want to support the work that we do, you can head to greenleft.org.au/support to become a supporter from just $5 a month. And it makes a massive difference to allow us to continue doing interviews like this and the other work that we do. So thanks for joining me, Thomas. Welcome to the Green Left Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you're based in LA and you've been present at some of these protests. And you're also, as I mentioned before, a member of the Bread and Roses Caucus of the DSA and an organiser within the Service Employees International Union, or SEIU. And just worth mentioning that the SEIU leader, David Huerta, was the union leader who was abducted by ICE earlier in the week. So I'm sure we'll be touching on that as well. So I guess to get started, for people who in Australia who haven't, been following all the details, how did these protests get started?
Yeah, so basically last Friday, sometime like 9 a.m., 10 a.m., there were a series of different raids that the ICE agents and other Homeland Security officers, so ICE's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, I think, they actually had one of the first raids that we knew about as the union right across the street at a Home Depot from our local office. So as we're part of the rapid response network for immigration sightings and stuff, we were kind of keyed into that immediately. So that initial raid was maybe 5 or so people that were detained, but then after that, it was popping up everywhere around the LA area and like downtown area that there were different sizes of raids happening at all over the place. But the next one that most people saw initially, I think, was the one that was in the fashion district, where there was a clothing warehouse that was raided, and there was about 30 people that they detained and were taken into custody. But outside of that clothing store, the community and SEIU and other organizations came out there to document what was happening. And so the ICE agents and federal agents barricaded themselves inside that building. So there were protesters on each side, and they wouldn't speak with anyone, they wouldn't release anyone, and after a certain while, very militarized FBI agents came down and basically forced everybody out. They had flashbangs, tear gas, pepper bullets. They had riot shields to shove everyone out as they brought in vans to basically get into this area, this parking lot, and just line everyone up and load them in one by one until they were able to leave. And the community was obviously not having that. They were not excited about seeing just this entire, militarized presence here. This is like an occupation of this random community. And so when the agents left, they actually weren't able to leave the way they wanted to, and the community kind of pushed them out. And that's when they just started throwing more flashbangs and tear gas and started shooting like the pepper bullets and stuff. So at like about 4 p.m. that day, because that was around noon, 1 o'clock, there was an impromptu rally that was kind of sponsored by SEIU California, which is what David Huerta is the president of. It's like the overarching organization for the locals across the state to kind of get their legislative priorities and stuff together. So he was arrested at a raid that was tied to that same warehouse, but just not that location. There was another one. And they basically, he was there to observe as well, and the agents decided to shove him to the ground and just take him into custody. So the emergency rally that we had at 4 p.m. Right outside the Federal Detention Center, which is in downtown, had like a mix of community groups, left-wing orgs, politicians, and a couple of the unions to kind of protest that detention. And then that evening is when the sort of major protests started kicking off. And then throughout the weekend, on and off, day and night, there was clashes with police itself.
Yeah, so there's been like a lot of media attention around, Donald Trump sending in the National Guard and the US Marines to, repress the protests. And obviously there's a massive mobilization of police and the ICE officers. So you mentioned, some of the police presence in terms of that initial rally, but what's it kind of been like generally, and what other tactics and kind of weaponry are they using against protesters?
So to me, at least in my kind of experience, it's not too unlike what the police were deploying against protesters during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. But this is, I would say, much more heavily localized because the major protests, at least throughout the weekend, that caused all the stir were like a couple block radius, like a mile. So it was very much an overkill when they started bringing out, primarily LAPD, riot and crowd control police with their batons or their helmets and their shields and stuff. And the first day or two, it was mostly they were mostly relatively hands off until the evening when they started, throwing the tear gas and stuff. But as it's kind of gone on, they've started to deploy more things like 40 millimeter like shots, like some kind of like less than lethal weapons. The pepper balls, tear gas, batons. I've heard rubber bullets and all the other sorts of stuff that would be very reminiscent of like the Black Lives Matter protests. But besides them, that's primarily the LAPD, the LA County Sheriff's Department, as well. To some extent, the California Highway Patrol, which is like our state police. They've all been coordinating to basically keep the crowds from, whatever they want to disperse it, basically. And alongside that, once Trump called in the National Guard, the National Guard basically just formed like a back line to the federal detention center where most of the protests were. So they were kind of just like behind the police, and they were mainly to protect as Trump says, they're mainly to protect the ICE agents and other federal officers and buildings and such. But as the days have gone on, they've been spotted helping in ICE raids, like having a few National Guard officers as like security for ICE officers as they just kidnap people off the street. But besides that, like I said, it's very reminiscent of Black Lives Matter and 2020 protests for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely an over-the-top kind of response from the police. And there was a clip that went viral in Australia because there's an Australian journalist over there for Channel 9 who got shot with a rubber bullet. And you can see in the video the officer, turns and sees, oh, that's a journalist, and then takes the shot. So that went.
Yep.
That was seen quite mainstream media sharing that around in Australia. So how are kind of protesters dealing with this massive police crackdown? Has there been any kind of tactics developed to respond, or is it just kind of like, oh, we have to, stay out of the way when the really intense weaponry starts being brought out?
Other than just protesting throughout the weekend and the days following Friday and throughout this week, they've been protesting downtown to the point where a couple days ago they actually instituted like a curfew for the area. So from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. it was when they really started cracking down and doing arrests and stuff. But I would say besides those protests growing and going into surrounding areas, I think some of the tactics are, obviously the viral stuff you see, throwing things at police, graffiti, vandalism, and all that sort of stuff. And to generally be in opposition of whichever riot police are out there, and just trying to maneuver and move around as police push and pull them into different areas. There's been I would say, a really big presence for the use of like group chats like Signal and other platforms to kind of help coordinate with people. Some of them are like hundreds of people large, where they'll give updates on like, hey, like police are coming from this street down this direction. You need to move. So I wouldn't say that it's exceptionally coordinated in a way to where people are able to respond quickly, but like a lot of those sort of warnings start happening where the people that are on the ground are able to start shouting things out and give call outs to kind of avoid things as much as possible, or if it's not in the individual protests, to sort of, get around the police coming. It's a lot of chats about saying when federal agents and ICE agents are around and how to counter protest them elsewhere, as they're trying to do their raids, to be able to stop them, to varying success. But yeah, I would say the use of group chats and sort of like on the ground call outs as like police try to do their normal tactics to kind of route people out and start arrests and push them out, I think is what is keeping people around and safer than normal, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. And good to hear this kind of communication going on. I guess kind of follows on to my next question about, who is participating in these protests? Is it just, everyday people? Are there any kind of leadership kind of structures within the kind of movement, or is it a bit more organic? And what kind of left groups are involved, or organized left or organized workers?
I would say that a large portion of it, especially throughout the weekend, were the largest, more viral instances of things that you would see on national and international media, are very much, I don't want to call them spontaneous, but they're not organized in any particular way. It's a lot of average people that have a general disdain for Trump, for immigration, and just the general state of things, police, but at the same time, outside of the couple of like tame union specifically sponsored rallies, because on Monday there was a large rally that might have been seen out for you guys, that was nearby the detention center, that was sponsored by like the Labor Federation and SEIU and the other supportive unions in the area to basically for freeing David Huerta, but also everybody else that's been taken into detention, which at this point has been about like 400 or so people that are in federal detention alone, let alone the protesters, which I'm not sure the number on. But in terms of like leadership structures, besides the union-led and official stuff, the kind of de facto organization that's like the quickest to get, like an infographic of a protest flyer out of some kind is usually the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They're kind of I wouldn't say they are the organizing force of all this stuff, but I think they're one of the quickest ones to have like a very specific flyer, time, place, and then that sort of starts spreading around, and other groups either go to that or they like make their own version of it and coordinate like, 2 p.m. downtown, we're all there. And besides that, there's not really like a leadership structure though to the protests. Like, during, when the police are pushing back and the protests, there's definitely some groups like PSL or other communist or socialist groups like the notorious, like the Revolutionary Communist Party, with Baba-Vakian folks and other sort of smaller insular tendencies like that will give like call outs and shouts and stuff to move back, to move forward, to, give like kind of tactical advice, I guess, for when the police are pushing and pulling. But to varying degrees, do people respond or not? Because there was an incident I remember seeing on Sunday where the protesters, a big portion of them, stormed the freeway and occupied it for a little while before police came in and started tear gassing and shooting and arresting folks and pushing them back out. But in that time, like some of those communist groups are kind of trying to give shout outs like, hey, we need more people on this side. We need people to move here. We need to back up. Like they're going to start pushing. I see cops coming from here, and combine that with all the signal chats and other things. Like people start as a blob moving. But that's the extent of the organized left that I think is involved, is sort of, showing up to the protests, or they're the ones that kind of create the flyer for some of these things. And then outside the specific protests, I mean, some of the other organized left are getting involved into the rapid response stuff for finding where the ICE agents are staying at, or finding where they're raiding, and confirming or denying those sort of rumors and stuff that are going around in between all this.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the rapid response network you mentioned as well before. Could you talk a little bit about that? And is it something that's being used across the country or just in specific locations?
So this is something that, to my understanding, it has been around for a long time, and is sort of coordinated among like the usual normal immigrant justice groups or immigrant law groups and different things. And it's usually by geographic area. They'll have like a hotline that you can call. Say you saw Homeland Security or possibly, ICE or someone in the neighborhood. You can call, you can report whatever you can. I saw 5 agents out here. They were talking to the fruit stand guy, or they're outside the Home Depot. They had these trucks, this time, this address. And throughout the rapid response network, there's paid and unpaid organizers that will see the report and respond and go confirm or deny, and document whatever they can when they get out there. So it could still be in process, and they can get people's names of who was taken or not, or if it's already been done, they can ask around the neighborhood and be like, and verify if it was just somebody that was afraid and thought they saw something, or if it was really like an ICE raid.
Yeah, it's good to hear about that, because I think we've got this pretty hardcore immigration border kind of control in Australia, where because we're basically an island, it's the only real way to get here is by sea. So we have immigration patrolling the waters and sending boats back out to sea, and that's been historically where the focus on our campaigns has been. So it's interesting to hear about the people who are already in the country, depending on however they got there, how to kind of organize to resist deportations and things like that. So that's something we're interested in finding out about as well. So that's good to know.
Yeah, and with regards to ICE and Customs and Border Control and stuff, their range for activity is like a 200-mile radius around the border of anywhere in the country. So since we share with Canada and Mexico and the seas, like ICE can operate within a really large chunk to do these sorts of raids. So that's why it happens to hit a lot of these major cities on the coasts and stuff, is because of that.
Yeah, they've got pretty wide-reaching powers, it seems. I guess to go a bit broader, obviously when Donald Trump was campaigning in the election last year, there was a heavy focus on immigration and, stopping immigration, sending people back, deporting people. Obviously, there's always been that focus on like building the wall with Mexico. So this has been a big part of Trump's kind of agenda. How kind of successful or unsuccessful has this been? Obviously, there's been this resistance that we've been talking about, and I guess who is being targeted. And I guess the other element is there major differences between this administration and the previous Joe Biden Democrat administration in terms of how it's dealing with immigration?
Yeah, I would say to answer the first part about whether or not it's successful in the shock and awe aspect of it, and that it's absolutely terrorizing immigrant communities all over the place, not just in Los Angeles. But I don't believe, from what we've heard from the immigrant rights groups and other politicians and stuff, through the grapevine and the unions and all the other sort of, NGO things, is that there's a big push on leadership in the Trump administration to get these agents to get like a quota of arrests in a way that's like quite impossible. Like the figure we've been hearing is they want 3,000 arrests from Los Angeles during this operation, and they're at maybe 400 in a full week span. So that's the reason why they are targeting what is essentially like the lowest hanging fruit that a racist person would imagine you could find immigrants at, or undocumented immigrants at, or even improperly documented, or whatever assumption that they want to make. So it's specifically Hispanic and Latino communities and wherever, a person would imagine that there's, day laborers doing, under the table work, Home Depots, car washes, restaurants. They've been heavily focusing on places of work, but in public areas where they don't need more of a warrant or more of any sort of permission to just scoop people up and go. So I guess the big difference in terms of the democratic version of doing this, at least with Biden, is that, like I said, this is very much a shock and awe. This is very much a visual. Seeing armed FBI agents in armored vehicles come down and forcibly push everyone out so they can round up a couple dozen people is something that they want to send a message to the communities that they're attacking, that we do not want you here and we will remove you. That's something that was even in ads on the radio and the TV in the last month or so from the Homeland Security, which is that if you are undocumented, we will find you and we will deport you. So you better leave now or else we're coming. So, they're just picking up any random brown person they could get off the street in order to hit that sort of quota. And the Democrats are not so much interested in doing that because by comparison, the Trump administration has actually in recent press conferences and stuff about the operations out here, they are targeting hardened criminals and traffickers and drug dealers and the people that aid and abet them. But they also, on the exact same sentence, will say, yeah, there's also collateral arrests of other folks that are around, which essentially, they treat anybody who is improperly documented in any form as the exact same criminality and need for deportation and detention and arrest, no matter what. So even if they are verifying if they're taking citizens in or not, they don't care, because if they're not citizens, they're just as lumped up as whatever else they're accusing people. So if you've been here 30 years but you just don't have papers, you're just as bad as a human trafficker or a murderer to them, and you're going to be scooped up and put in the same prison and shipped out to God knows where. And I don't think the Democrats do anything near that, even though their policies are inhumane as well. They keep the same systems up and running, on and off these Trump administrations.
Yeah, so it's obviously would be a pretty terrifying thing to, as you say, see a armed vehicle come down your street into your community, etc. I wanted to touch on, the broader kind of, obviously it's the main target of this has been immigrants and undocumented people. But, as we mentioned briefly, the SEIU President David Huerta was arrested as part of the protests, kind of taken in by ICE. I know he has since been released, but, he's a US citizen. There's also been the targeting of Palestine solidarity activists and students, some of which have been also, taken by ICE and locked up and potentially threatened with being deported as well. So I guess what does this reveal about the Trump administration's kind of broader agenda in terms of targeting kind of anyone who seems to be resisting what they want to do? And how is, the union movement, organized labor, kind of responding to this?
So it's great that you brought up the Palestine crackdown as well. This is slowly turning into a similar sort of spectacle, I guess, because right now they are trying to lump in, organized labor and regular immigrant rights groups as completely equal to what they see as like agitating outside troublemakers protesting and defacing and doing all these things, and conflating them all into one blob of the socialists, the lawbreakers, and those aiding and abetting all of this are all in one group. This has been the rhetoric that the administration has been pushing, and the leadership of Homeland Security and these other agencies on the federal side. On the local side, they're trying to, do as much as they can to toe this line of pushing back against the federal government's policies here. while also still cracking down on protests and cracking down on people doing things. So there's a collaboration in this way of really finding anybody that did anything that they deemed improper in these protests as something to really crack down on. Trump himself said that if you so much as spit on an officer, we're going to get you. David Huerta was basically observing an ICE raid, and they're charging him with a charge that is a maximum sentence of 6 years for essentially showing up and doing what the Rapid Response Network stuff has been doing for years. So to me, I think this feels more like it's not as coherent, but it's sort of a Red Scare-esque thing of just cracking down on like dissident thought. There was actually, in the LA Times, there was a federal prosecutor in the area that was quoted as saying, with regards to people that were at some of the ICE raids initially, is that we know that unions were there. We know their officials and their organizers were there, and that we will identify you. We're working around the clock, and we will find you, and we will get you. And this has been a repeated message from a lot of the federal government that we will get you and we will find you no matter what. And even as we're talking right now, there's already a political show happening on the Senate level, where one of the subcommittees in the Senate is already trying to subpoena the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and also one of the immigrant rights groups here, and God knows who else, in order to make them show all of their communications from November 2024 to now, and to cease and desist aiding and abetting the rioters and the agitators and the anarchists, or whatever it is that they're talking about. And in terms of, there's a line being towed here in terms of, what some of these organizations are doing to fight back, and then what the normal, labor unions and other sort of community orgs that are always around are trying to do. But it's been sort of absorbed by a similar conversation as like the Black Lives Matter protests of there's the good protesters and the bad protesters. This is a conversation that's happening in local news and local politicians and stuff, and to some extent the federal level as well. But the Trump administration doesn't care about that distinction. This is all aiding and abetting criminals, point blank, and it deserves to be prosecuted no matter what. And that's, I think, the thing that's the most worrisome about it, I guess.
Yeah, we've had kind of similar crackdowns, obviously not to the same extent in terms of the police presence and the police violence, but we've had a lot of anti-protest laws being introduced in the last few years, particularly responding to the Palestine solidarity protests and basically trying to criminalize protests in any way that they can. So that's an important fight that's also going on here in Australia. I guess I wanted to ask about whether there's any potential for this to become into a bigger national movement, and what protests are happening against ICE and these deportations around the country.
I think you're starting to see now more of it finally beginning to spread, as it's very clear that the Trump administration is not letting up in terms of trying to make an example of Los Angeles and the political leadership here, because California's by and large Democrat supermajority of any persuasion. So to the Republicans and the Trump administration, this is the example of every single thing that is wrong with the country is what's happening in Los Angeles. They're really trying to make it into this sort of flashpoint. And the Democrats are using this as well. It's maybe to their advantage to sort of push back and give themselves clout as to not collaborating with the Trump administration. But I think I think there's a potential for it to continue to spread as he continues to exacerbate the situation. The National Guard being called in without the governor's permission is something that's unprecedented. I think the last time that happened in our history was during the civil rights movement in the 60s, where the president did that to desegregate the schools. So this is sort of like a very unprecedented overreach on the federal level that could, separately from the protests growing and spreading, could be a major overstep and constitutional crisis for us because, he's going to continue to push here in Los Angeles. And if the protests spread, there's going to be major suppression among the other states and cities as it continues to grow. And it's just going to probably repeat the cycle. They're going to learn from what they're doing here, I'm sure, and continue to try to tramp down this as this goes on. I have hopes that the protest movement will continue to spread. I'm seeing good things in other states and cities online right now, but the fear I would have is what they're already trying to do now with prosecuting people involved in the protests here, is that they are using what the Democrats did to prosecute the January 6th rioters, using video evidence from the protests and pictures and posts and geolocating and other sort of things they might have to, maybe they haven't arrested everybody right now or charge people right now. 6 months down the line, when they're sifting through all these TikTok videos and Instagram posts and whatever, like, there's going to be a lot of people getting arrested in the same way that they did the January 6th protesters, which are all pardoned now as well. So it's really just a blatant, overstep of power. But I think there's hope. I think there's hope that there's going to be continued pushback as time goes on.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And hopefully, yeah, as you said, hopefully it can continue to grow and build resistance to this, very kind of scary and unfair deportations. And hopefully, hopefully you're wrong about the people getting arrested later on, but we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see. We've had things like that happen here as well. I guess I just wanted to, for people who are watching this and want to find out a bit more, is there anywhere you'd recommend that they go to find out a bit more information? And did you have any final comments you wanted to make?
As for more information, I would say be on the lookout for, our publication, The Call for Bread and Roses. But any sort of publication from more left-wing outlets of any kind, keep an eye on what DSA on the broad scale says, PSL especially, what they might say about what's happening, because they have a decent reporting apparatus. But I would say continue to look at and see things on social media to the extent that you can, even just searching locations of protests or ICE protests or whatever on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, because there's a lot of good reporters that are out there from various outlets that are on the ground and showing you the reality of the situation. Because I think if you only look at statements and pictures from the normal national news outlets, it's going to give you a really incorrect picture of what's happening, because they do not highlight the state violence against protesters. They're only highlighting when protesters protest in a way that they don't like, setting things on fire, throwing things, whatever they want to deem as improper. But they're missing all the times that they shoot a foreign reporter with a rubber bullet that's this big.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks so much, Thomas, for all your time today. It's been very insightful. I guess just wanted to mention to people who are watching this that Green Left is going to be co-hosting a forum discussion about the protests in LA, and also kind of connecting it to the refugee rights movement here and what we can kind of learn from what's going on over in the US. And that's going to be taking place on June 24th at 6:30 p.m. in Naarm, Melbourne. And we'll potentially might have Thomas as a speaker. We've got to work that out after this. But it'll be really interesting, and it'll be available on Zoom as well if you're not in Melbourne. So definitely check that out on the Green Left website. And as I mentioned at the start, if you enjoyed this episode, you can head to greenleft.org.au/support to become a supporter from just $5 a month. It's the best way to both help us keep producing this content, and also the best way to actually access it and get it sent directly to you. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Green Left Show.